Us for this session. It's good to have you all here with us this evening. Just a little bit of background. We as a congregation have a child and youth protection policy in place to be a safe sanctuary congregation. And part of that says that we will do some annual training for all of our volunteers to encourage them to be a little more aware of the different dynamics that can be involved with that. And Kim Good is our coordinator for that this year. And as we were brainstorming different ideas, we came to the idea of inviting someone with some expertise to come in and share with us a little bit, and that led us to Dr. Natalie Nugent. I'll introduce her in just a second, but a couple other housekeeping things. If you are one of those who attends here and is a part of working with our children, there is a sign-up sheet in the back so that we know that you're here. We're going to be videotaping this, and so those who aren't able to be here are able to watch at another time and still be able to get the information. We thank you for allowing us to record your presentation. I also want to note that if you didn't grab one coming in, there is a handout on the table out there that has the slides that will be shared tonight as a way of being able to refer back and also to take notes. So feel free to grab one of those. Well, Dr. Natalie Nugent is a fully licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in the assessment and treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder and other trauma-related conditions. Dr. Nugent earned her PhD from Eastern Michigan University, where she completed specialized pre-doctoral training in trauma-informed care. She has national certifications in both prolonged exposure therapy and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as extensive training in cognitive processing therapy. In addition to her work for McCaskill Family Services, Dr. Nugent currently serves as the Chief Operations Officer for Huron Behavioral Health, a community mental health center in Huron County, Michigan. In addition to this role, Dr. Nugent maintains a consulting practice, Lake Huron Wellness Consulting, through which she regularly conducts community and organizational trainings on trauma-informed care, the effects of childhood trauma exposure on long-term functioning, and compassion fatigue and burnout in mental health human services professionals. She is also able to offer equine-assisted therapy at McCaskill Family Services, so that others may have exposure to the healing effects of horsemanship and the equine bond. So thank you for being with us this evening, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share.
Wonderful.
Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction. All right, I have a lot of technology on me right now, so can everyone hear me all right? Okay, we're trying it in the boot. Let's see if it works. Wonderful, and I think everyone has the slides, and everyone hopefully can see the presentation up there. And it's just really, really an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic because although difficult and oftentimes painful to think about the mental health challenges that are faced by our youth right now, it really feels like there are so many people who have a passion for how do we understand the trials that our young people are facing and how do we support them in various ways. So I'm really pleased to be here this evening, and I hope to keep it a little down, but a little bit hopeful in the fact that there's a lot that we can do to provide really good support. So thank you for the introduction. I think you've shared about me, so you guys know kind of where I'm coming from. And I wanna start tonight actually by opening up the question to all of you. So there we go, beautiful. Such technology, this is fantastic. So I have three questions that I'm posing to the group tonight. And so the questions are just briefly as follows. What are the common mental health challenges that you feel like you're seeing in children and adolescents? How do you think youth mental health concerns have changed, in your opinion, just in your anecdotal, observational opinion, over the past 5, 10, 15 years? And what do you think it's like to be a parent in today's climate? So I'd like to just open it up to the group if you're willing just to share any of your thoughts on any of those questions posed there. Yes? Can you say, I missed that first part. Yes. Yeah, so we have such a deeper understanding of both what we call adverse childhood experiences, or we shorten it sometimes to ACEs, events that are experienced in childhood that have long-term impact on health status, both mentally and physically. And we also have discrete trauma that's experienced. So, it could be something like a medical trauma. It could be the sudden loss of a loved one. Certainly, it could be exposure to physical or emotional abuse or neglect. I think I saw another hand as well.
I'm just noticing that there's a lot more nervousness in students these days than there ever was before. I've been doing youth work for a while, and that is much higher now than it has been in the past.
And I think folks would argue that there's a bit of a change in the amount of pressure on young people as well. So it's not to say that youth, adolescence hasn't always been marked by different challenges, but we are in a really, really intense time of expectations of children, and they're facing different pressures in their communities. Like we're going to talk about technology tonight, that is different from what those of us in this room faced. I think, yeah.
Would you repeat what is being said by the people, because we can't hear back here?
Yes, absolutely. So we had the mention of the increased level of trauma and trauma exposure in the schools, in youth and adolescents, and then a reference to the increased amount of anxiety and nervousness. Yep, absolutely. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I think bullying, but to the degree also that you add the social media type of bullying. It's not just in school, that they have it at home and everywhere they go now.
Yeah.
Even at school.
And we're actually going to talk about that towards the end this evening when we're thinking about some of the core impacts of technology. And you'll see in my slides, I'm sort of a hopeful psychologist. I hope when people hear me speak or they work with me that they get the sense that a lot of what we're talking about is heavy, but that there's still hope. And so I am not here to kind of say technology is an evil and we should rid our young people of it. But it has some real ramifications that I don't think we were prepared to grapple with when there was such an explosion of what was available. Yeah.
I think on the question of what it's like to parent, one of the things that I'm aware of, with my children at least, is the need to teach coping skills more intentionally than the past.
Yeah.
There isn't just that natural understanding, or else the need is just greater. I'm not sure maybe it's a combination. But the coping skills and teaching them in an intentional way, there seems like it'd be a greater need for that.
I really appreciate what you're bringing up there, because that intention to teach and to allow young people to learn these skills is so critical. So I work with a lot of adults, and it's really interesting because even things like emotion identification. So you'll say to someone just very openly, "Can you tell me?" Is it okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, let's try this. Here we go. We're back. Okay, false alarm. Hang on. Let's take my earring off. I hope you got that on the recorded so everyone can appreciate you. I will try to project in the meantime. So I think that it's very, very important that we're talking about the intentionality of teaching skills. And I gave the example, so you might ask an adult and you might say something like, yep, absolutely. All right, how are we doing now? Do I have to get closer? Oh, you guys, you're bearing with me really well, thank you. I'm a mover when I talk too, so I'll try to stay put. Okay, let me try my anecdote one more time. So we'll say to an adult, can you tell me how you're feeling today? And they might say something to us like, I don't know, not good, not great. And you'll say, okay, can you be a little bit more specific? Tell me a little bit about what sort of emotions you're experiencing. And oftentimes the response that we get will be bad, not good. And what becomes very clear is that unless you have learned, either in childhood or later on in life, because you've done the work to gain those skills, if you don't have even the words to describe how you're feeling, so I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling ashamed, I'm feeling dejected, I'm feeling isolated, it becomes very hard to then know what to do with those feelings. And so that teaching of skills has become a core part of what we're doing with young people to try to help them even have words to describe what is it that I'm feeling in this moment, so that we can then help to describe, okay, when you're feeling this way, here's a series of activities or practices that can help with that. So there's pressure on parents. There's pressure to try to do this, to try to teach in this way, and parents are juggling a lot. Are there any other thoughts here before I move forward? And you're welcome to share any thoughts as they come along as we move forward. So consistently, what we're talking about is an increase, right? Is that fair to say? That things feel more intense, more difficult, more challenging. And, the spoiler here is that it's not just you, it's not just me, it's not just us. So, in fact, it was October of 2021 that we saw the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and the Children's Hospital Association come together to declare a national emergency in child and adolescent mental health. And that was a really profound moment, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm a little biased because I'm a mental health worker, but a profound moment in recognizing that, as my title stated, the kids are not all right. They're not doing well collectively. Does that mean kids aren't doing well individually? Of course not. We have kids that are doing great. They're thriving, they're excelling, they're doing wonderfully well. They have beautifully supportive environments. They have wonderful natural supports like a church community surrounding them. They've got teachers who care and are involved. However, the proportion of children facing mental health concerns is consistently rising year after year. And it looks a little bit like this, just to give you some fast facts here. So when we look at the data that I have up here, I've separated it out into some of our most common concerns. So most frequently reported concerns. So when we look at depression and anxiety, you can see that just between 2019 and 2021, that we had a doubling of depression and anxiety in adolescents. That's a big deal. We've got 25% of students endorsing depressive symptoms, 20% endorsing anxiety. Yes, absolutely. So self-reporting symptoms that are consistent with that diagnosis. Thank you for that. What is really scary about this number is that these numbers are significantly higher than baseline. So we would expect to see maybe 10-ish% or so of kids endorsing these types of symptoms, and now we're seeing 25, 20%. So we're talking 1 in 4, 1 in 5. So I have had conversations with educators, and I've had conversations with principals. I had a conversation with a principal just this morning. And they will say things to me like, what I see now in elementary school, in middle school, feels absolutely different than 10 years ago. And I know we've got some educators in the room, right? Would you guys agree with that statement? Okay. I see some consistent nodding, that things feel and look different. So we know that our kids are more likely, more susceptible to be depressed. We know that they're more likely to be anxious. And unfortunately, we know that that's contributing to increased risk of suicide. which is something that we can't ignore. We can't kind of place in this box of this is something that happens to other folks, or this is something that's experienced by other children, because the numbers are too profound. When you see the data here, so I've got, some research looking at between 2009 and 2019, and we're looking at the proportion of students who are reporting that they've considered suicide, and an increase of about, what does that say, 36%, I think, on my slide? Okay, so 36% increase there, and then this is terrifying to me. When you look at the number of students who are reporting a suicide plan, and we're going to talk in a moment here, in a few slides, we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between suicidal ideation, the thought of suicide, and developing a plan, because those are two very different things. But what I'll share with you now is that the thought and development of a plan places someone much higher on the risk continuum than someone who has had perhaps just passive thoughts. I've got to just share this really quickly. So when I got here and we were getting set up, and then I went to use your restroom, and you guys have a sign from NAMI in the restroom that looks at what you should be looking at in terms of mental health signs. I just commend you. I don't know whose decision that was to put that up there, but it's brilliant, because we need people to be aware of the mental health risk that exists. And when you normalize it to the extent that you have it someplace like a restroom where you can just see this in passing, what this does is it brings bright light to the concern that we're facing. Instead of treating it as something that should be hidden, that should be secretive, that's somehow shameful, we're saying, hey, are you struggling with your mental health? Because the odds are, if you look around you, others are too. And we want to be here to acknowledge that, to ask questions about that, to support you. This is huge. So I digress for a moment, but I just wanted to say, what a cool thing for me as a psychologist to see and think, yes, you guys get it. You care. You're here. You're in it with kids, with adolescents, and adults. The other thing I really want to mention here when we're talking about suicide is the rate of emergency room visits for suspected suicides. So this is pretty staggering too, that we're seeing an increase in 51% for girls ages 12 to 17. And there was recently, and by recently I mean probably 2 months ago now, my time kind of blurs together. About 2 months ago, there was a report released on the state of adolescent mental health, and the findings were pretty dire, particularly for young girls, particularly for adolescent girls. The data looked as scary as we have seen it in terms of the percentage of adolescent girls reporting that they have had either suicidal ideation, that they've developed a plan, or that they've had intent to act on that plan. And this is something that I think we have to grapple with in all domains. So this isn't something that we can say, well, maybe it's because of X and kind of insert one variable. We know that when numbers rise this much, it's a confluence of factors. There's more than one thing going on here. And so then I also am just going to kind of have some brief facts here looking at mental health emergencies. So emergency room visits for mental health emergencies are also on the rise, where you see, about, risen 24% for children ages 5 to 11, 31% for children ages 12 to 17. So I work in, behavioral health, obviously. Gosh, I feel like I'm bad at this, guys. I am bad at the microphone. Sorry. Can you hear okay? Okay. As long as you tell me it's all right. So I work in behavioral health. I spend a lot of time consulting on our emergency services department that we have. One of the things that we do is if there is an individual in our county who is in crisis and they present to one of our local ERs, so that could be McLaren Thumb, that could be Sure, or that could be Harbor Beach. If they have Medicaid, if they have Medicaid and then another primary insurance, if they have no insurance at all, if they're underinsured, our agency has an emergency services team at Huron Behavioral Health, and we send a clinician to the hospital to complete the screening to determine if it's indeed a mental health emergency and if that youth needs to be placed in an inpatient psychiatric unit. And I say youth, but we serve all ages with that particular service. Some data trends that we have seen, and Mr. Schwarzendruber is here who sits on our board, so you probably heard this data from me, is that the data is scary. Our numbers have tripled in terms of the number of individuals who are seeking emergency services care. The age has decreased, so we're now seeing children ages 6, ages 7, ages 8. We are in such, in our country, so this is not just in Huron County, we are in such dire straits that we don't have the mental health or the physical health infrastructure to provide the services, inpatient psychiatric services needed to these age groups. I mean, I have a 6-year-old daughter. I can't imagine what that would be like to have to say, now I'm going to turn my 6-year-old over to a psychiatric unit where they're going to stay for 5 to 7 plus or minus a couple days to receive the treatment that's needed. But parents are having to grapple with these decisions, and hospitals are having to grapple with these decisions. And then they're saying to us, we can't accept someone that's this young. We simply don't have the infrastructure to support it. We currently in Michigan have 2 hospitals that will accept youth, 3 hospitals that will accept youth under the age of 8. And we have to use them regularly. And that's terrifying to me. So when I see these numbers and I see the creeping up of that 24% rise in those ages 5 to 11, it's not just a statistic to me, it's something that I live on a regular weekly work week. And our clinicians are grappling with that as well. So this is sort of like the doom part of my presentation, but I promise I'm not gonna leave it there. I'm not gonna just say like, okay, well, good luck, everybody. So what I want to do is when I look at this data, I think to myself, okay, so what do we have to do? Like, what's the game plan? Because this isn't okay. And all of you came here tonight, I'm assuming because you said to yourselves also, this is something I care about, I have some interest in, I hope. And you're here tonight, which is awesome, because I think everybody is asking, how can I be a part of the solution? And I am a big proponent of the fact that you can't address something that you haven't first kind of identified and understood. So I always start with parents, with caregivers, with natural supports from a place of let's get good at recognizing the problem. If we can't recognize it, we can't respond to it. And I want to walk through a little bit about what we should be looking for as adults in the lives of these children. So what I have up here on the screen is on the right hand, on the right, I'm sorry, I'm having like a moment of mirror image here. So when you look up here on the right-hand side of the screen, what you will see there is our actual diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder, okay? Super helpful to just kind of know the signs, but I want to walk you through something that we call the cognitive triad or the cognitive triangle, because I think this kind of pictorial representation is really helpful in understanding what this looks like in youth, but also in adults. So when we think about depression, and I could kind of rattle off symptoms to you here, you know, we think about things like feeling depressed, feeling down at least every day, most of every day for at least 2 weeks. So we're looking at the intensity of the symptoms, we're looking at the intensity of the mood disturbance, we're looking at the duration of time that people are feeling this way. But what's really important is that depression comes with more than just not feeling good. It comes with more than just feeling sad or feeling down. What is sometimes a hallmark indicator is a reduced interest in things that people used to enjoy. This is so important to keep in mind that it might not be the person who's saying, gosh, I'm so sad, I'm feeling tearful, I'm feeling down. It might be the person that you see who just has lost their spark. You know, you think to yourself, gosh, you know, you used to love to Insert anything, right? Go for a walk, go fishing. You used to love to come to the movies with me or go out to dinner, and now you don't want to do any of those things. Or you used to love to draw and paint, and now I've never seen you pick up your art supplies. Or I remember how you used to always call your friend, Susie, and you would always have a plan, you'd always be doing something. And I don't even remember the last time you talked to Susie. So it's that change in functionality. And what we then see is that as you become more down, for lack of a better word, then things start to change. Your thought process starts to change. So you will see that people will become sometimes more negative or more pessimistic in their thinking, sometimes more extreme or even more black and white, more concrete in their thinking. So you might have instances where if, let's say you've got a little one and 12, 14, something like that, and you're used to seeing them kind of engage and play with friends, and now they're saying things like, well, it doesn't even matter because nobody likes me anyway. That's a really concrete thought, so that's not a thought like, oh gosh, I'm having a hard time with Joe. That's no one likes me at all, right? We're on one end of the continuum here. So you see a change in that top circle there in your thought process. And you also then begin to see a shift in the behavior that people engage in. So people will start to become one of two things, either more slowed down, more lethargic, less energetic, or you might see people who are really keyed up and really on edge. They have seemingly much more energy, but in a very intense way, as opposed to I'm just excited because the weather's nice and I want to get out and rake the leaves, right? A more nervous, fidgety, on edge, restless energy. You're going to see changes in behaviors like, how is this person eating? How is this person sleeping? We often see changes in our sleeping patterns, and then it's a vicious cycle because the more impaired your sleep is, the more impact that has on your mood. And then we see changes in how does this person, start to view the world. So things like, now I feel kind of helpless. Now I feel sort of hopeless. Now I think that perhaps there's not much going for me. There's not much hope in ever making some appreciable changes. And when I put this cognitive triangle up here, one of the reasons I use this is because our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors all interact. And I always think about this from a math perspective. Any math like gurus or teachers? Yes. Okay. So if you have a triangle, what happens if you shift any angle of that triangle? What happens to the other angles? Yes, I love this. This is like, I feel like my former algebra teacher would be very proud of me. Or is it geometry? I just embarrassed myself. There we go. Perfect. He wouldn't be proud of me anymore. So I love the idea here of thinking about it as this triangle where as one thing shifts, the other angles shift as well. As my emotions change, my thoughts change. As my thoughts change, my behaviors change. So we use the cognitive triangle actually in really effective therapeutic ways to help shift people in how they're thinking, how they're engaging, which in turn shifts mood. But one of the first things we see when we're looking at depression is that we start to see a pattern of my thoughts are really pessimistic, my thoughts are more concrete, my thoughts are more that this is bad and it's always going to stay bad. We tend to see changes in emotions where people feel sad, down, disinterested, and they feel perhaps more on edge, more restless, and we see behavioral changes. I'm sleeping differently, I'm eating differently, I'm interacting differently. So if you can keep those three components in mind, it helps to kind of frame what it looks like when you're looking at a picture of depression. So my question, you guys don't have to share, anything that you're uncomfortable sharing. My question is, when you think about the adolescents that you encounter in a regular day-to-day going about your business, do you see kids who you feel like fit this picture? And I think we could make the case that we all know children who are struggling with depression. And there was a time where we really had sort of a belief in like the protectiveness of youth. So what I mean by that is, how many of you have heard things like, they're kids, they'll get over it? Or like, well, kids are resilient. They'll be fine. They can get through that. So, true, kids are super resilient. Human beings are super resilient, frankly. But they're also human, right? They're also people who have brains and brains that do these things. And so we can't just sort of couch it in, well, yeah, they're struggling, or yeah, they're down. We have to pay attention. We have to recognize, is it more? Is it more than just an adjustment to a stage of life? Is it more than just, oh, I'm kind of struggling with this, that, or the other thing? It may be a depressive presentation. And why this matters, one, because it feels terrible, and I always encourage people, especially in trainings when we're talking about mental health in like another population, right? Like we're looking at mental health in youth and adolescents, but I would ask you to turn it inward for a moment and to think that I can guarantee that every single person in this room has either experienced depression in their life or has a loved one who's experienced depression in their life, because the facts don't lie, and the data bears that out consistently. So, if someone is lucky enough to not have experienced it themselves, then they've seen someone else suffer. And what's important about that is that we can use sort of that internal awareness, and we can use these clinical markers so that we can best respond to and support youth and adolescents who are struggling in front of us. So I feel like I'm really hammering this point home, guys. But here's what is important from my perspective. The risk of untreated depression is high. So the risk of untreated depression is A, suicide, and we know the rates are increasing. B, isolation. And what do you guys know about isolation? So just as a human being living in our world, what happens to folks who become isolated? Yeah, so I know I'm repeating for the folks in the back as well that the comment is we sort of just die inside. If we're isolating, then we're not growing. We're not able to engage into our full potential. Human beings are social creatures. We crave social contact and social support and connectivity within groups. And this is something, and I'm gonna just kind of jump ahead in my thoughts here for a moment, because this is very, very much tied to technology use in our youth. There we go, I got it. And part of that is because social media in particular can be incredibly connecting, or it can be incredibly isolating. And it is all in how it's used. But our young people are not always savvy enough to know how to use it in healthy ways. And frankly, neither am I as an adult, right? As like a fairly functional human, I still find myself having to pull back and think to myself like, whoa, I don't need that. I don't need to check that 3 more times today. So the tie-in here is that when we're thinking about depression and we're thinking about anxiety, which we're going to get to in a moment, we're also thinking about what does the behavior then look like, and how does that tie in to the technology use and patterns of use. Okay, moving forward. Next slide. I'm trying to keep myself on track time-wise. I could go all night, guys. Okay, so what about the second most common problem, which is something that we call generalized anxiety disorder? Okay, so everybody knows, I think, what it feels like to be anxious. Who here has ever had to give a speech in front of people? Who here has ever thought they'd rather do anything other than that? Okay, we got some people. Okay, perfect. I always joke that like now I have a lot of like consultation work and a lot of training work, and I do a lot of public speaking. But I was also the same person who left my intro to communications class in my undergrad to the very last course I ever took, because I was like, oh no, I won't be doing that. And I think I had this like magical thinking that they would get rid of that requirement by the time my 4 years were up, and Joke's on me. Here I am. So, but what's really important about this is that we can have discrete anxiety in response to like a stressor, right? You got to take a test, you got to give a speech, you got to pay your taxes, you got to go and deal with an angry friend or neighbor. But we can have anxiety that rises to a really pervasive level. So generalized anxiety disorder is, again, a pattern. And we think about this pattern of anxiety as lasting for at least 6 months or more. And it infiltrates every aspect of the person's life. So now you start to see difficulty with controlling the worry. You can't put it to bed at night when you lay down to sleep. Let's say you're a kid and you're playing basketball for your team. You can't put it aside to go out on the court and play basketball because you're still in your head worrying about those things that are really bothering you. And what we tend to see then again is we see, if I go back just real quick to that cognitive triangle, we see changes in our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. So with anxiety, our thoughts tend to get a little bit catastrophic. Our thoughts tend to get worst case scenario. This is gonna happen. What if, what if, what if, what if? Anybody in here a what-ifer? Anybody like willing to admit it? Okay, yeah. I'm a what-ifer, and my husband is a what-ifer, so sometimes we have to like balance each other out and be like, okay, we gotta take a break from this, because we could create these scenarios a lot. So what happens, though, is you start to see the changes in this catastrophic thinking. And in kiddos, you will see changes in cognition that look pretty specific, too. So worst case scenario, something that we call mind reading. Mind reading is, I know this person's thinking this about me. I can see it on their face, right? I just know that they're thinking how I messed up, and they're probably going to tell all their friends, and all their friends are going to remember it, too. And when I try to go try out for the track team, they're going to laugh at me. You guys see what I did here. And this is more than just okay, I've had this thought and it's a difficult thought and now I'm gonna move on. This is now, I can't engage in activities that I used to enjoy because these pervasive worries and anxieties are too much for me to handle. And so again, we see changes in behavior. We see people who are more keyed up, who are more irritable, who are more on edge, who can't sleep, who find it difficult sometimes to eat or to talk with other people. And so what happens then is, again, people try to pull back. So when we as human beings are faced with aversive stimuli, so when we encounter something that doesn't feel good, part of our instinct is to escape or to avoid. I want to pull back from it, I want to get away from it. And again, we kind of come to that idea of isolation as really, really problematic, because isolation perpetuates the cycle. The more isolated I am, the less likely I am to encounter then conflicting messages. So let's say that I'm a kiddo and I say, I can't try out for track because I just know that I'm not gonna be any good, and then they're gonna laugh at me. Well, then I never get an opportunity to maybe get on the track team, encounter those people who are also learning, encounter people who say like, nice job, right? I lose all of that reinforcing activity in my environment, and so this is, again, a self-perpetuating cycle. And unfortunately, what we worry about is, one, again, I'm gonna say this, it just feels bad. Nobody wants to feel anxious all the time. Nobody wants to feel depressed all the time. But we have some really concrete risk associated with it too when we think about risk of suicide. So I wanna just kind of like set a frame here for a moment. Currently, the second leading cause of death among individuals ages 15 to 24. So scary that that is the second leading cause of death. 20% of high school students report seriously considering suicide. 9% have made an active attempt to take their own life. So you're looking at a classroom of maybe, let's say, 25 students, and you can assume that perhaps 2 to 3 of those students in that classroom have actively attempted to take their own life. I just feel like we need a moment to reflect on that. Because to me, that speaks to the level of anguish that people are in when it feels like suicide is a better option than living with the pain that they're in. And I think it's really important to frame this from people don't choose to complete suicide because it feels like a good idea to them. People complete suicide because they feel like they have no other option. And I think that's so important when you're thinking about how do you respond to suicide risk, to think about how do I offer people other options? How do I create a setting in which they feel as though there is something else? There is hope. There's another possibility. And I'm just going to give kind of a moment here to reflect on the fact that our suicide rates had been climbing steadily pre-COVID-19. So we had already seen an increase in rates of suicidality, and then we had the pandemic. And what we had during that time was what I have consistently referred to in trainings like this as collective trauma for our world. So it was experienced differently by everyone, it was responded to differently by everyone, but it still represented a collective trauma. If we can think back just for a moment of sort of the early days of COVID-19 when there was a lot of unknown and there was a lot of fear and all of a sudden there was a lot of change, right? So we're closing this, we're gonna change this, we're gonna respond in this way. When we saw the images of people dying, when we didn't know how to respond, our children witnessed all of that too. And then when they watch all of us as adults sort of lose our collective minds and fight like cats and dogs over it, they watched that too. And they're dealing with that. Just like we're grappling with the after effects, so are they. They're just less cognitively developed. And look at us, right? We're all still struggling to kind of like piece everything together, figure it all out, get back to whatever sort of normalcy that means to us. But during this time, we know that kiddos were more isolated. We know that they had less exposure to natural supports who were protective, so we know that rates of abuse and neglect increased pretty substantially, or we know that we ended up with less reporting and protection of children who are experiencing abuse and neglect, because if you're not in a classroom and your teacher can't take a look at you and see the fingerprint bruise that you've got on your arm because somebody grabbed you, then they're not able to report that. Then no one's able to intervene. So kiddos were isolated, they had more abuse and neglect, and when you look at the stats about the level of loss in our country, many, many children lost primary and secondary caregivers. And so then you're looking at traumatic grief and loss that kiddos have experienced. So we had already rates of suicidality that were increasing, and then we had a really huge perfect storm of more vulnerability factors that were layered on top of that. And now we have seen kind of this explosion in mental health distress. So you guys are probably like, I wish she would leave, because this is not what I signed up for. It is a tough topic to talk about, and I appreciate you guys bearing with me here. I wanted to, again, kind of think about this idea of, so what do we do? How do we look for this? How do we make sure that we respond when there are risk factors there? And this is sort of like my easy cheat sheet, and I use this with parents, and I use this with kids, and I use this with clinicians that we're training. We look for 4 things. If you are concerned about suicide risk, you are looking for, does this person have suicidal ideation? Which is a fancy way of saying, are they thinking about ending their life? And I'm gonna ask all of you to think about it this way if you're talking to people. Please don't sugarcoat the language with the people you're talking with. We have a tendency as humans to say things like, you're not thinking about hurting yourself, right? So what am I doing there? Yeah, I'm like, you're not gonna tell me what I don't wanna hear, right? I'm clearly shaking my head at you, right? And I'm also saying hurt myself, right? So what does that mean? Yeah, sure, I'm not gonna go throw myself down a flight of stairs. Nope, I'm not gonna hurt myself, right? We need clear, bright light on this problem. We need to say to people, are you thinking about taking your life? Are you thinking about ending your life? Are you thinking about killing yourself? It sounds, it's not like what you say in polite company, right? We don't ask these explicit questions. But what I can guarantee you is that if somebody is thinking about suicide, you asking them is not gonna put the idea in their mind. But you having kind of a, okay, I'm gonna ask it, but I really don't want the answer, so I'm gonna say it in a way that you can tell me no, that is just reinforcing the idea to them that like, okay, yeah, I shouldn't say this out loud. I shouldn't feel this way. So we say to people, are you thinking about taking your life? Are you thinking about killing yourself? And there are two types of suicidal ideation, passive and active. Passive is, I wish I'd be better, I think I'd be better off dead, or I think the world would be a better place without me. Active is, I want to die. Do you guys see the difference kind of in those two statements? Yeah. When we think about suicide risk on a continuum, we think about passive ideation as less risky than active ideation. Because passive ideation is kind of like, this doesn't feel good and I think maybe I don't want to be around, but it hasn't taken the step into, now I'm going to take steps to not be around, or I want to act on those thoughts. So, and that kind of leads us to, does this person have a plan? This is what we follow up with. If somebody says, yeah, I've been having thoughts of suicide, we say something like, can you share with me if you've come up with a plan to end your life? Have you thought about how you would take your life? And you're gonna get, again, a divide. Some people are gonna be like, no, no, I wouldn't do that. No, I just have the thought, but I'm not gonna do it. Other people are gonna say, yeah, I do have a plan. And you're not gonna put a plan in their head that they didn't already have. Let me just put your mind at ease there. We don't traumatize people by talking about trauma. We don't create suicide by talking about suicide. The stuff is already there, and we have to be willing to have those brave conversations. The next part is, do you have the means? There's an amazing suicide prevention campaign called Means Matters. The reason is because there are ways of ending your life that are more lethal than others. And if people are saying they want to use those means, it's at higher risk. If somebody says, I want to use a gun to end my life, that's very, very, very risky, as opposed to somebody who says, I don't know, maybe I would just go out in the cold and wait to die from frostbite. Those are two very different ways of thinking about ending your life. So the means question matters. And the other reason it matters is because we want to know, how would you choose to do this? Because we want to be able to restrict access to those means. So if somebody says to me, I want to overdose on my medication, you can concretely say, would you be willing to give your medication to me so that I can keep it safe? Or to your mother so they can keep it safe? Would you be willing to lock your medication up and give the key to that to a trusted adult, right? We can start to make a difference in then their access to the means. And the final question that we ask people is, do you have an intent to act on these thoughts, on this plan, with these means? And again, it's a dividing point. Some people will say absolutely not. One of the biggest reasons I hear for no, I will not act on it is, anybody want to take a guess? I'll give you a hint. We're in a church right now. Religion. Yes. It's one of the biggest things that people will say. People will say, I have the thoughts, I have the plan, I have the means, but I will not do that because I believe that it goes against my religion. And we say, fantastic. We've got a protective factor in place now, because now you've identified something that makes you feel as though that's not an option. The intent has changed. Other things that I hear, my animals, my loved ones. Right? We hear, and I mean, I have had somebody say, I'm not going to do it because I don't know who would take care of my cat. Perfect. Awesome. That's a fantastic reason to stay alive, because your cat needs you to be alive. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to buy time to give this person additional options so suicide doesn't feel like the only option on the table. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. So I guess now to why you brought me here, the technology piece, right? I really buried the lead. So here's the thing. Everything that we've talked about so far, it's gonna all tie into this, I promise. So I will not keep you over. I can do this in 10 minutes. Okay. So this is a really interesting slide. This is data from 2022, and I think it's really helpful to just set sort of like an expectation of what does it look like right now in terms of how much technology and social media use adolescents are getting, kids and adolescents. So you can take a look at the bar graph. Tweens are ages 8 to 12, teens are 13 to 18, and you guys can see from 2015 to 2021, like the numbers are just ticking up. Those are hours a day that kids are spending on technology and social media. Ruh-roh, too many. Like, I look at this and I think to myself, like, well, we gotta get them outside. Like, we gotta get outside, come on, guys. And if you look at like social media usage up here, you can see 97% of adolescents are using social media. Here's the tricky part. What happens if you're part of the 3% that's not using social media? You're isolated. We are in a no-win situation because we know that technology and social media has some negative ramifications, but we also know that we can't ostracize and keep kids isolated because that doesn't bode well either. So we're all in this position of, okay, how do we do it the least destructive way possible? And the good news is that there are some ways to do that. So that's sort of like the hopeful part of tonight, that kids aren't really doing okay. Kids are really struggling. This is too high. Kids are doing way too much on their screens. But there are some ways that we can manage it, and there are some good things. So the other thing I wanted to just point out real quick is this idea of smartphone access. So you can see some data on like how many kids have access to a smartphone. And the reason that I plugged this in here is because what this means is the technology, it never goes away. It's literally on you at all times. I always think about how when I was growing up and we got a computer for the first time in our home, and then my parents put it in a super public place, and then you had to sit like with your parents watching you, and then you had to listen to the dial-up connection, and then, you know, like by the time you got through it, you were just like, you know, it's not honestly worth it. I'm just gonna go to bed. So that experience of technology is way different than like, okay, good night, guys, I'm gonna take my phone in my room by myself, and now I'm gonna spend all this time doing things that you have no idea. Right? Very, very different experiences. So, you know, we think to ourselves like, okay, what are our biggest concerns? What are we most concerned about? One, we know that there's a correlation between social media use and depressive symptoms, okay? We just know that the more you're on social media, the more likely you are to experience some depressive symptoms. And anxiety also kicks up as we see social media usage. And what's interesting is that there's a stepwise correlation that the more social media accounts a person has, the more increase in anxiety you see for that person, which is not surprising because I don't know, how many of you guys have a social media account of something? Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, right? Most people, okay. It's a lot, right? Like, think about just one social media account and how much there is to respond to identify, to interact with. It's a lot of sensory overload. Same is true with kids. The more they get, the more they're responding to, and the more we see changes in anxiety level. What else are we concerned about? Cyberbullying. Somebody said earlier that now the bullying that's experienced, they can't ever get away from. And that is 1,000% true. You used to be able to go to school, maybe you had a bully at school, but you went home and home was your safe place. Now you've got a phone on you where somebody can send all of the bullying information they want 24/7 and there's no escape from it. In the evenings, on the weekends, anytime. And I'm here to say too that this is not a problem faced just by adolescents. So anybody been on social media lately? People say horrific things to one another on social media, things that you would absolutely never say to anybody face to face. But you have the anonymity of responding in typing form where they can't see you. It's much easier to be aggressive. So the level of bullying and the nature of things that are said look very different than what you might get in, let's say, you know, a passing conversation in the hallway. The other thing is that we know that, unfortunately, cyberbullying tends to be directed toward kids who are also experiencing other forms of bullying. So they're already getting pushed around in other areas of their life. They may already be being ostracized at school, left out deliberately, picked on, pushed, shoved, but now they've added the cyberbullying. So the problem with it is it's not like, oh, cyberbullying replaced traditional bullying. It's now you just have all of it front and center for these kids to experience. And then what's really scary here is that this isn't just a problem for the victim. When we look at data, we see that both the victim and the perpetrator of cyberbullying are both at increased risk for increased mental health distress and suicide. It doesn't feel good to be a bully either. And this is where it's really hard to kind of help work on this idea of, okay, so how do we make sure that we're responding to the needs of both of these parties? It's not just the kiddo who's getting harmed in this way, it's also the one who's doing the harming that is at risk and needs attention. This is not going to be a surprise to you guys. Additional concerns, self-esteem and social comparison. Anybody work with kids? What do they say about what they see on social media? Yep, 100%. So the comparison factor is through the roof. So now it's not just, okay, I go to school and I see maybe like something that someone's wearing and I think, man, I wish I had that. Now it's literally lifestyles presented to you with music, in color, fast-paced, producing dopamine, and you don't have it. You're just sitting there as a passive watcher of what these other people are living to the fullest. And it's all curated. Every single piece of that is curated. And now, let's say that I'm on Instagram and I accidentally click on something that turns out to be what they call thinspo. Have you guys heard of thinspo? Thin inspiration, okay? So now I'm 16 and I accidentally click on a video that's gonna tell me how to be thinner and how to have the body of my dreams. Now I've clicked on it once, so guess what my Instagram feed is gonna give me day in and day out? More thinspo. So now I'm gonna have a curated feed just for me that's gonna tell me how I can't live up to this body image. So the idea behind this is that we're also seeing this huge dramatic change in self-esteem, in how kids feel about their appearances, which is already like a really crappy time when you're an adolescent. Like, I think we can all agree it's not the peak of how we feel about ourselves in adolescence. But for kids, like, they don't have the benefit of hindsight, you know, so they're not like standing there at like 40-some years old being like, man, I really actually looked pretty good at 16. Instead, they're sitting there like, oh my gosh, this is awful. Look at what these people look like, and I don't look anything like these people. And it's true of males and females. This is not just a female issue. The problem, too, is that let's say I accidentally click on something about self-harming behavior. Right? Like, I can reduce my mental health distress because I cut or I burn or I do something destructive to myself. Again, now my feed is gonna give me, literally, feed me, as it describes, exactly what it is that we as like mental health professionals and social supports are trying to not get. Okay, you guys, it's 6:59, so I'm gonna do my best to kind of like roll through this. You guys bearing with me, okay? Okay, perfect. So I wanna just like jump to this really quickly, because I think that when we look at the data and we look at some of the concerns, we think to ourselves, okay, so technology is horrible. This is bad, this is terrible, our kids are being destroyed from the inside out. And what's really at least hopeful about this, in my perspective, is that there's actually a lot more variability in the data than what news headlines would make you believe. So when you start researching technology, social media, and mental health, one of the things you see is that the data isn't as strongly correlated as people might believe. So social media use doesn't always equal depression. It doesn't always equal negative social comparison. In fact, sometimes there are ways in which we actually see some positive influences of social media and technology. So we have some decent studies that show things like increased creativity, improved connection, especially like across geographic boundaries. People are willing to reach out and communicate with others in different ways, which is awesome because it helps to break down some of the boundaries of, okay, I live in this community, I feel this way, and therefore I don't even think that there's anything else out there. We've seen an awesome rise in health-related information that's actually good health-related information. So you can see that kids can now access different things that can help them understand their mental health concerns, respond effectively to mental health concerns. It's an awesome source of humor. How many of you guys have enjoyed like a good video or something that's been shared back and forth? So there are positives to social media use. We look, and these are all, by the way, everything here when we think about like enhanced social support, the creativity, the connection, There's a research study to back up every one of those components, where they can actually find a statistical connection between the use of technology and these outcomes. So whenever we look at something like that, we can think to ourselves, okay, cool, we know that both things are true at the same time. How do we get more of this and less of this? And these are my tips. This is, where'd the slide go? Hang on. There we go. Okay. Oh wait, we're missing one's not coming up for some reason. Hang on, guys. It's blank. Okay, so I'm gonna pop over to this, and then I'll give you the other ones. For some reason, that one didn't show up. Okay, so I'm gonna give you the first one I think it's on your slides. Do you see one on your? Okay, you see it. So time spent, right? Let's see if I can memorize my slides. Time spent. What we know is that 3 hours or more is correlated with increased depressive and anxiety symptoms. So we're trying to keep it under 3 hours. And if you look at this slide, it's gonna come. It's gonna come up. Hang on, I know it's coming. When you look at the slide that I showed you earlier where we looked at the bar graph and you're looking at right now, kids are like on their 8 hours or more, you're like, there we go. We gotta bring this down. And parents can do that by setting intentional limits. And kids, like, let's be honest, kids don't like limits, but they do well with them. We all know that. We all know that people need boundaries. You wouldn't let them eat 6 pounds of chocolate before they went to bed. They don't need to have 5 hours of scrolling TikTok before they go to bed. So we know we need to set healthy limits, but we don't want to take it away altogether because A, you make it forbidden fruit, and B, you isolate them from their peers, neither of which is good. The other thing that we know, time, activities, there we go, active versus passive. Thank you, guys. Okay, we know that there's a difference between active and passive utilization of technology. And this is really key, so if I give you guys anything in terms of tips, it is really about this active versus passive. There is a way of interacting with social media and technology that makes you a part of the conversation. When I engage with other people on social media in constructive ways, if I comment, if I chat, if I like, if I curate something creative and post that, those are active ways of engaging in social media. Passive ways include scroll, 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 scroll. How many have seen this, right? We've all been guilty of it, I'm gonna be honest. What happens is that's much more correlated with the self-image issues and kids feeling like they don't live up and they can't ever achieve what they're getting. So we don't wanna see kiddos spending time just mindlessly scrolling. We want to see them, if you're gonna use your social media, then you're gonna use your social media. You're gonna actually be a part of the conversation because that's the social connection building part. So then when we get to this second component of what parents can do, investment. So we've got to balance how invested a youth feels in their social media presence. And the best way I can describe this is, as a person, you have to have different facets of your life. And the more facets that you can have in your life of things that are meaningful to you, that you value, that make you feel connected, that make you feel like life is worth living, the more likely you are to build that sense of contentment and feel good about yourself as a person. Social media investment should be a component, not the totality. So if you want to have friends online in your social media accounts, that's great. Who are you seeing in person? Who are you connecting with in the real world? Because we have to balance this out. If you want to look at artists on TikTok, that's amazing. What are you creating? What are you building and adding to the conversation? We need these multifaceted kiddos so that they understand that if something goes wrong in one area, if something goes wrong with my social media, that doesn't define who I am as a person. That doesn't mean I have now failed to be a good, upstanding adolescent. It means that there's a part that they're struggling with. And then finally, parental engagement. So I love this study I'm going to share with you really quickly. I also read this study when my daughter was 2, and I feel like I still had kind of baby brain, if that's a thing at 2, where I was like, oh my gosh, must follow this study to the T. But there's a really interesting study where they looked at behavioral concerns in children, and they could directly correlate them to their parents' technology utilization and the number of hours that their parents spent on social media and technology. And what we know about parental engagement with this is that our kids are always watching. They're watching everything we do. And we have to be the models and the stewards of effective technology use. We have to model the fact that if I want you to go out and play, I don't go sit outside on my phone and play Candy Crush while you play outside, that I get out there and get dirty with you. And when we do this, we see that parents and families who communicate about technology have less distress related to it. Parents who set healthy limits and actually set those boundaries for themselves have children who have less of the negative outcomes associated with social media. So I feel like there's a lot of hope in this because there are concrete, tangible things that we can do. And to me, that's what kind of mental health psychology is all about. It's recognizing that we have a problem and then it's concretely responding to it. And so I'm just going to close with one final exercise that I have continued to find as one of the more profound brief interventions. And this is called the 3 Good Things exercise, and it was developed by Dr. Martin Seligman, who is a positive psychologist. He's actually a brilliant faculty emeritus out at University of Pennsylvania, but he was a U of M grad and faculty member. And one of the things that he developed was a model of positive psychology. How do we create mental wellness in folks? And he developed in his research lab something called the 3 Good Things exercise. And it literally is as simple as each night before you go to bed, describe 3 good things that happened during the day, write them down, and reflect on why they happened. And just in doing that, what you have is an increased level of contentedness and happiness in yourself and your children. And the idea behind it is that as human beings, we're sort of hardwired to focus on the negative. But if we can kind of have this moment to reflect on what has gone well and why has it gone well and how have we been a part of creating it going well, we can start to set the tone for shifting away from some of those patterns of negative mental health distress. So I did keep you guys 8 minutes after, and I really apologize for that. It's hard to pack it all into 1 hour. But I would just kind of close by saying that, again, this idea is we have a problem, we know it's a problem, but we know we have solutions, and I really honestly believe that we have the drive in people in our communities to meet the challenge head on. So, questions, thoughts, comments? Ta-da! Thank you. There you go. All right, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us this evening. Some really important things for us to be more aware of, and also the invitation for ways that we can be intentional in our own lives and in the relationships that we have with others. We really appreciate that. And so for those who are here, as I said, this is recorded, and so it will be available for others. If there's ones that you want to share with, we can get that information out to you. And I trust that you'd be available also if there'd be further questions to follow up and do more work with that. So thank you so much, and thank you for being here tonight. Have a good night.